Hello. If you're interested in spirituality, in religion and science, in AI, in God, in evolution, you are going to love this conversation. I just spoke with Ilia Delio, who is a Franciscan sister who had started out her in her early life as a scientist in her career and is an American theologian, author of over 20 books. Um, she teaches at Villanova, and we just had a wonderful conversation a little bit about her book, The Not Yet God, and about God at the depths of matter and just the general depth dimension of matter, and spirituality and theology and Teilhard de Chardin, Carl Jung. And then we got into AI. And wow, that was just a very, very rich and eye-opening conversation. So I think you're really going to enjoy this, and I hope that you do. And please, if you do enjoy this conversation, don't forget to like, to subscribe, and to share this with others. Thank you. Welcome to the Sacred Everywhere. I'm Dr. Sheri Kling, and in this space we explore how the sacred shows up in real life, in our questions, our struggles, our longing, and our hope. Can we find the sacred in every place and everyone? Let's see. All right. Well, welcome, Ilia Delio, to the Sacred Everywhere. I'm so excited to have you on this podcast. We've had some interactions before through my work with the Center for Process Studies and also through the Hayden Institute. And and so I'd love for you to just begin, if you could give the listeners a little bit of the story about how you went from being a scientist to
Hmm.
being a Franciscan sister and the work you've been attracted to as you've been doing that process.
Well, I've always been a spiritual person, although I always haven't been explicitly spiritual. I was sort of a closet Catholic. And I was in matriculating as a doctoral student in pharmacology. My area of science was pharmacology, in particular neuropharmacology. So I did a
Mm.
master's degree that looked at schizophrenia and possible pharmacological agents at that point that could reduce that. And then in my doctoral work, I was looking at models of ALS. So we used experimental drugs to mimic pathology of ALS. And so
Mm.
I was fascinated. I've always been fascinated by science. I love science. But I always had this kind of love for God as well. Although in science, you don't talk about those things. It was in my day, that was a no-no. So I'm
Yeah.
very worldly, very political, very involved. But in the meantime, I had come across the life of Thomas Merton, and I
Mm.
was really fascinated by Merton's life. When I read it, like in one night, I was like, "That's what I want to do." So it was hard to really discuss this with my scientific colleagues because it would have been like a Martian, landing, talking about something completely different, from earthly life. Uh,
Wow.
so I basically was introduced to a group of Carmelite nuns in Pennsylvania, and I started visiting them while I was finishing up my doctoral work at New Jersey Medical School. And I was pretty good in what I did. I was one of the five at that point. There were very few neurophysiologists, so I was
Mm.
an electrophysiologist. So I looked at the electrical components of the nervous system and
Wow.
landed a postdoc at Johns Hopkins Medical School in the Alzheimer's unit. So I would have been my area of research was sort of aligned with other areas of Alzheimer's research. So I went down to Hopkins and signed all the papers, and then I went off to a monastery and to live for 3 months.
As you do.
And at the end, I wrote everyone and said, "Well, I'm leaving research science and I'm becoming a Carmelite nun." And they were just like, they couldn't understand what happened, like
Yeah.
concussion, or she's had a significant brain injury, or she's had a mental breakdown of some sort. But this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Anyway, it took a long time, for them to recover, and I wound up, in a monastery, and then eventually in Franciscan. The monastery was not what I had expected. Like Merton left out a lot of details about monastic life. And I lasted 4 years. It was a good training ground. It was like boot camp for spiritual life.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
I kind of graduated, like my 4 year degree in the monastery. And I was sent to live with German Franciscan sisters because I actually went back to Rutgers to do a postdoc in neurotoxicology. Uh,
Ah.
so I was to live with the sisters while I was at Rutgers, but as I lived with them, I'm like, wow, they're a little bit more fun, like they wear a habit. I was very, very traditional, so they wore a habit, and they
Huh.
prayed like 4 times a day, and that was cool with me. But then I could get in the car and go to my day job at Rutgers. So
Oh, okay.
these were two very different worlds, the world, and I wore a habit
Yeah.
at Rutgers, and that was really crazy.
Oh, wow.
We're like,
Yeah.
oh, one time this guy came in and said, "I'm looking for Dr. Delio," and I'm like, "Well, that happens to be me, but that's okay." Yeah, and then I realized I could not stay in research, and that level of research as at the level of the nun that I was at that point. So
Mm-hmm.
wasn't sure what I was going to do, and the community called me in because I asked a lot of questions in the community and drove them crazy. So basically, they were like, we should send her to study because she does that very well. So basically, they asked if I wanted to study spirituality, and I said, what is, like, I have no idea what spirituality really is, I mean,
Huh?
I took two theology, maybe one or two theology courses in college, and I thought, should I pay any attention to these things? I mean, they seem
Yeah.
fluff to me compared to a world of science. It was like,
Right.
you read a few books and write a paper or something. But so I didn't take it all that seriously. And I said, sure, I'll get a master's degree because, I don't want another doctorate. So I started at Fordham University,
Mm.
even though I had a scholarship to Princeton Theological Seminary and Drew University, both, reached out and were very
Wow.
invitational. And the community said, no, it has to be a Catholic school.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, I wound up going to Fordham, but I was a young sister, so I could only be at Fordham for the time of my courses, and then I had to come back and be in the community and work in the community. So we had a
Mm-hmm.
nursing home, we had a novitiate, so I was in the novitiate at that point, my master's.
Mm-hmm.
So, but theology was like an eye opener for me. I always say it was like a fish finding water,
Mm.
fish on land, and then I found a fish finding water. And
Yeah.
actually, my area was in patristics, so I wrote my master's thesis on Augustine on happiness and
Mm.
rule, and loved the fathers of the church, loved Gregory of Nyssa and all those dudes, and and then wound up studying Bonaventure, a Franciscan theologian. Well, as a
Oh, yeah.
he's like, could you do something Franciscan? I'm like, yeah, maybe. So loved Bonaventure and his very dynamic understanding of, the Christ as the center of the cosmos. And so I came to really love
Mm-hmm.
Franciscan theology. It's very,
Mm-hmm.
very process oriented, even though no one has ever really spoken about this way. It's very relational,
Huh.
very incarnational. So I have always seen in Franciscan theology the grounding or the rudiments for a contemporary theology that is consonant with the new science. And so
Mm-hmm.
theology has built on my Franciscan roots, like
Mm.
Teilhard de Chardin actually factored like as a short little chapter in my dissertation because I did a comparison of his uh, Christogenesis or Christocentrism with Bonaventure's Christocentrism. But I never thought that much about Teilhard then. I thought, well, that's just nice. He's very interesting. And then, long story short, I taught Franciscan theology for 10 years. I actually was chair of the spirituality department at the seminary, Washington Theological Union, taught the history of
Mm.
Christian spirituality for 10 or 11 years there. And then actually was invited to join a research group at Georgetown at the Woodstock Theological Center, which was a Jesuit think tank at that point. And
Mm.
um, that's where my work in Teilhard began to kind of take off as I was in discussion with another Jesuit there who was very interested in similar questions. And we had these research seminars, which was a nice way of engaging ideas, philosophical and theological ideas that led to, and then we also had part of the archives of Teilhard because Teilhard
Wow.
was a Jesuit. So
Right.
one day the office manager came to my office and said, I have like 4 boxes, I think, of Teilhard's writings. Do you want them? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And I looked into them and they were his notes from like 1917, the 20s, the 40s, up until about 51. We had
Mm.
notes from Teilhard. And so I got to see how he thought, about some of these ideas that we now discuss, but it wasn't easy.
Yeah, and just to interject, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin was a French Jesuit and also a paleontologist.
Correct. Yes, thank you. Yeah, he was a French Jesuit paleontologist of the Eocene era, 56 million years ago, I think. And
Mm.
yeah, tried to bring together, that was in his life, as he brought them together in his life, science and religion. You know, um, but what was so interesting about him is the way he read in French and English, and he would draw all these diagrams in his notes, trying to, in his mind, form connections between these things. So ever since then, I have been a keen disciple of Teilhard because I do think, he does have a vision for uh, not just theology, but sort of a cosmic, a cosmotheism for the 21st
Yeah.
century, which is what I think we really need. We need theology to kind of find its way back to the larger whole, the cosmos.
Right.
And yeah, my work ever since then, over the last, I guess, 15 or more years, has been building on Teilhard's insights. It's a
Hmm.
wonderful foundation to build a construct a theology that is at home in the world we actually live in. Uh, um,
Yeah, and I love the way he talks. I mean, I haven't read everything of his. I've, started with the Ursula King Selected Writings book, which is such a beautiful book because it gives you so much richness, all within one book. But I just love the way he talks about like the deeper he went into matter, the more he found God there.
exactly. Yeah, that's the whole thing. I mean, and that to this day, I have students who just kind of, they open their eyes and they're going, "Oh my God, that's heretical, isn't it? To say that you found the absolute in matter." And
Right.
that is right. That's the turning point here. And
Yeah.
yeah, we're still very, Platonic, Neoplatonic, where spirit has this precedence over matter, and it's been the root
Hmm.
of a lot of our problems,
Exactly. Exactly.
constructed and everything. So yeah,
Yeah.
Teilhard's, and then I didn't know Whitehead very much, although the person I worked with, you were cousins, wrote a book on process reality. It was an essay
Hmm.
volume. And that was an introduction to me, for me to process theism. But yeah, Whitehead is another very rich, complex thinker, much more complex and structured than Teilhard is. But there is a deep resonance between a lot of their ideas.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, we had that great exploration of resonances between their two ways of thinking at that conference we did at Villanova a couple of years ago.
Exactly.
And such a rich discussion.
Yeah, for sure. And so much more yet to really keep discovering and discussing.
Yeah. And then of course, you know of my own deep interest in Carl Jung and my work integrating Whitehead and Jung. And now recently, well, what was it? Did it come out a year or 2 years ago? Your book, The Not Yet God, Carl Jung, Teilhard de Chardin, and the Relational Whole came out.
Yeah.
So, and I just want to talk about in the very beginning of that book, you write, every 500 years or so, religion undergoes a significant paradigm shift. The shift we are in today is so dramatic, I thought about putting a warning label at the beginning of this book. Warning, this book may be hazardous to the stability of your soul and may cause undue anxiety or outright bursts of emotion. We are indeed in a major God shift. The old god of the starry heavens, the sky god, has been falling since the early 20th century. At the same time, a new god has been rising up from the strange world of matter.
Yeah.
I love that. So talk a little bit more about
Yeah.
your way of seeing God as not yet, as developing, as evolving, as growing, and then how you brought together Jung and Teilhard in that conversation.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, even as I reflect on my own life, because I was so much the sky god, for so many years. I mean, the father figure, God, the father knows best, God knows everything, God will take care of everything. And so it was a kind of comforting, secure blanket, that God was in control. And yet, honestly, my shift in understanding God does not come with theology, it came with science. As I began to
Mm.
understand a little bit more, which I don't by no means fully understand, but consciousness and quantum physics and the way energy is our root reality and the way consciousness plays a role in, the fundamental determination of reality. And even though these are not settled issues by any means, but I think this principal role of consciousness in what matter became, as I reflected on that, it just made all the sense in the world. And so this is where Teilhard became significant in my rethinking even the word God, as he himself was struggling, also rethought what God means. So, and I think what it is, it's really a shift because every time we use this language of God, like as a proper noun, like God is a person, and we have
Huh?
the idea as a person having a substantive being, it's divine
Mm.
being, and this being is not created being. And that itself just contradicts what, we know from the Big Bang and the unfolding of space, time, and matter. There's no being, over being. There's just the real itself as it's beginning to take shape,
Mm.
and that sheer mystery of the even taking shape, like, what guides or what allows this process to move from this hot, energetic, dense, field of energy into this more structured force fields of gravity and, a strong force, weak force. So Teilhard thought deeply about these questions. He was familiar with the work of Louis de Broglie and Max Planck, who said that consciousness is the basis of matter, that
Mm.
everything begins with consciousness. And
Mm-hmm.
consciousness,
And
where Whitehead makes a distinction between experience and consciousness, but Teilhard took consciousness right down, I think, to the level of fundamental experience itself. He didn't make that distinction. And so
yeah.
basically he said that every living particle of matter, every quark, every lepton, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
has a quote unquote inside and an outside, and that inside may be the wave field, of that quantum event, and the
Mm-hmm.
outside could be the particle aspect of that quantum event. But everything sort of is wave particle, everything is mind matter. And so
Yeah.
dual aspect monism, where everything is, mind and matter are not two separate things. And that's a huge theological, that, in terms of theology, we're not there. So we still have mind as something that's maybe part of the soul, but we don't really know what to do with, consciousness itself in theology.
Right.
Bernard Lonergan
Right.
is what to do with it, but it's not great. We have a robust theology by any means. Taylor,
Yeah.
very kind of almost a simple linear way. It's not really linear, but he saw this developmental, aspect of mind and matter. And in his view, he developed these three laws. One is the law of recurrence. So whatever is taking place on the smallest level of material life is taking place on the larger level. It's like a fractal, repeat.
Mm-hmm.
And then he had this law of creative union, that whatever's taking place is coming into greater union. It's unitive nature. Um,
Yeah.
and and he said basically, as things unite, that led to his third law is that, complexity, the intensity of relationships, is corresponded with an increase of consciousness. So the law of complexity consciousness, the law of creative union, and the law of recurrence, are his three primary laws to say that life keeps building up. We go from little single cells to multi-cells, to, little earthworms to, rabbits and robots to, then to us. Robots really,
Yeah.
by the way.
Robots what?
Come after us, not before us.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. Why is it that life is moving towards more complexity and consciousness? That was Teilhard's question. And so,
Yeah.
he posits two other things. He says, well, there seems to be a principle at work here, sort of like what David Bohm also, posited, a kind of principle that allows this, coherence of mind and matter,
Hmm.
potential of some sort. For Teilhard, it was a presence, what he called a centrating presence of a particular type of energy that he called love energy. And
Yeah.
this love energy it's love, he said, because it's unitive. It's not wearing down, even though everything else is wearing down. Love continues
Hmm.
to build up as life keeps building up with consciousness and complexity. So this Omega principle became fundamental to see how his paradigm is about something within matter that is not reducible to matter and yet cannot be, understood apart from matter.
Right.
Sort of like a coincidence of opposites of some sort, a dialectical presence of some sort.
Hmm.
And this is the language of a mystic. So one thing that Teilhard does is in his own way, he moves beyond materiality or materialism into mysticism. And they're
Hmm.
saying that materiality itself has a mystical dimension. And of course, that's where scientists are like, oh, no, 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 no. He got that one way wrong. He really doesn't understand what he's talking about. Like, there are many laws and rules here. But we all know that physicalism or pure physicalism is dull. I mean,
Right. Right.
if we have 3 billion neurons in the brain, we can't even figure out two neurons. So, you know, what's the big deal? Or, you have 120 blood cells that recycle every 120 days or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
this stuff doesn't give us life, right? So what Teilhard did recognize, very much like Paul Tillich and others, like certain
Hmm.
our friend Carl Jung, there's a depth dimension to our physical being, right? And so
Yes.
that's where I think the correspondence between Jung and Teilhard became very interesting for me. In
Hmm.
first of all realizing that what we call God, it's a name, but it's a name that points to a deeper reality, right?
Yeah.
You can't exhaust what that reality is. Like the minute you think you know what God is, it's not God.
Right. Right.
About you or
Yeah.
going on there. But you can't say like, and that's why I have begun to really question, all our doctrines. Certainly in the Catholic, we've got a lot of, really, and in flesh doctrines. They're like, this is it. You got to believe this stuff, or you're out. It's in or out. It's like believe,
Right.
like you're saved or not saved. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so unhealthy because
Yeah.
really strayed away from even Jesus, who was all about experience,
Hmm.
all about the depth dimension, right? I think
Yeah.
going into the desert is about coming in touch with the shadow side of his own life.
Yes.
I'm sure you've written about this stuff, and so I think Christianity really like it strayed. I mean, it's got such wonderful potential to
Hmm.
help vitalize life today. But man, that car went off the road. I don't want to say went into a ditch, but pretty close. It's like in a lake someplace. You know,
Yeah.
Get it out. So I think Jung and Teilhard can really help us. And to say that
Absolutely.
is a depth, a presence, Teilhard at one point speaks about this consummated being that's in becoming, that's a dynamic, being. There's no such thing as just sheer static beingness. And, Jung's idea of the unconscious and, God is an archetype and that we're all open to that archetype. We have access to it, but that doesn't even exhaust what God is.
Yeah.
God is always, this is where I think Anselm did get it right, always the more. That
Uh-huh.
greater can be thought is so our minds can only go so far, and then you have to yield to what this mystery is. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, of course, I was talking with Trip Fuller, recording with him yesterday, and I was saying that as theologians, we love to speculate. We love to talk. I love to talk about God, speculate what God is like. But we have to always keep that humility that says these are all metaphors, and we have really no idea what is behind the metaphor.
None. And that's the whole thing is we have, like, I would use maybe Whitehead's The Fallacy of Misplaced Concreteness,
Yeah,
that we know what God is, that we actually have a handle on divine essence. Even that term, divine essence, who are
right.
we? And even the term essence has no real meaning to me in a world of energy, in a world,
Mm-hmm.
it's pure relationality and pure, electron, jumping and fields of, electromagnetism. And so what does essence mean in the world we actually live in? So that's the question.
Right.
And so, this is where when theology is not open to the sciences, honestly, anything's, you can say anything, and I know people who talk about God like it's still the 16th century,
Yeah.
and we have no problem importing and teaching theology from the 5th century, the 12th century into the 21st century. It's like it's all the same. It's all same God. And I'm like, no, it isn't. Not at all.
Yeah.
A long shot is not the same God. So for us to think that God never changes, that is the first sin. That's
Yeah. Exactly.
so
Exactly. And
sad.
and part of it too is the perspective of, even if you look, like I remember listening to a series of lectures by John Shelby Spong where he was talking about, if you look at the way that the understanding of God changed throughout the scriptures, you do see that there's this um, move from the tribal to the universal. There's these evolutions happening, which we don't always see as clearly because the Bible is organized. It's not organized chronologically. It's, organized in different ways than that. And so we don't see that movement. But he was talking about, where the prophets eventually got to in terms of pointing to this universal God. And so we could say, like, I could entertain the idea that certainly our understandings of God evolve. Now, I also, and someone could say, well, God isn't changing so much as our understanding of God changes.
Well, I think the
Um,
unconditional always remains the unconditional. The uncreated always remains. So I think God is more like the possibilities. God is always like the field, you know,
mhm,
that's, waiting to be determined or responded to. It's more like
yeah.
the field of a call, and we have
Uh-huh.
response. So,
And we have,
right, there's no actualization of God apart from a beloved, and I think that's
mm,
all attest to that. Hosea
yeah.
is a great, piece of writing in that regard.
Mhm,
Or the Song of Songs, a beautiful, testimony to a relationship. It's the primacy of relationship where the lover and the beloved, it's a constant call and response. And when we fail to respond, but God is not, even to say that God is unchanging, the call always remains. That's what we mean by
yeah.
changing God. The call
Right.
never goes away. It's infinite, eternal. It's an eternal call, but
Mhm,
it's always into new being, always
mhm,
life. And therefore, life itself is a perpetual response to that call. So the call,
yeah.
in a sense, in a Whiteheadian sense, it's always new because the response is taken up into that call, and the call then is issued in a new way each time.
Right.
Is a way to say that God is unchanging change, or the primordial consequential, however you want to call that. But it is to say that the possibility is always there. The power of love, or that invitation to love, is all. I have loved you. You know, um, I will love you. What is it? I have loved you with an everlasting love, and I
Yeah.
will always be faithful to you. That's what I take that to mean. That unconditional field of divine love will always be there and
Hmm.
always in our heart. And it's we who have to open up. That's where Jung becomes very, very helpful, you know,
Right. Right.
whether that,
Because that's he's talking about our own depth dimension. I was watching a video and I won't I need to watch it again to get a better grasp of all that he was saying. But with David Lynch, the filmmaker, talking about transcendence, and he was so interesting. He was talking about as scientists looked deeper and deeper at matter, that we went from, like, he was talking about going from four forces to, and then he was like three and then two, and then ultimately it's this unitive field, which is that absolute out of which everything arises. And he said it's that same as we engage in, like, he was talking about transcendental meditation, but as we engage in that as a human, and we then go deeper, we're going into that same unitive field, and that's what the source of our creativity and dynamism and vitality. And it's what Jung called the primordial mystery, that rushing river of being
yes, no, absolutely. That's exactly what
or becoming.
talking about the scientists. Like, actually, I awoke to spirituality again in the lab. Actually,
Hmm.
I was looking at. We had a very high-powered microscope that was like it could, could go up to 300,000 power, and what would be invisible to the naked eye, under this microscope was like a living city. It was
Hmm.
all this life going on in this single neuron. And it was just really incredible. It's just like, and that's where the opening of my dissertation was in a single cell of life lay the mysteries of creation. So,
Hmm.
in other words, science, the true scientist, really, once you open up to what science and the depth of matter, you can't stay on the level of material. It's opened up to something more,
Right.
of mystery,
Right.
of what we might say the unsayable. You just can't name it, you can't measure it, but you experience it, and that's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah,
In fact, in your book, The Not Yet God, you quote physicist Max Planck, who said, "Science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature." And that is because, in the last analysis, we ourselves are a part of the mystery we are trying to solve.
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. So and this is really important for us to keep in mind, especially in our own time where we feel that we have the power to know everything, and that we can, be our own answer. And we really can't. We answer to there's an other, that is more than us, at the heart of us, that grounds us and yet is with us. It's such a mystery. And yet
Hmm.
it's nothing other than, and that's what that is, I think, where Jung and Teilhard became also significant for me. Like, there's nothing out there. And that, I think people, when I look at more conservative Catholics pray, for example, like the Our Father, and I wonder, are they actually picturing or imagining, there's a God out there who's listening to their prayers? And I'm like, there's no there there. And that makes people frightened because it sounds like it's collapsed into pantheism. Like it's just
Hmm.
us, really, that's it. And it's like, well, that we are the mystery. So I always say God is not the mystery, we're the mystery, right?
Hmm.
Talk about going into levels. What does that mean? I mean, physiologically, you can talk about maybe brain centers that are being activated, but what does that mean as we move through these different levels of meditation into transcendental? We're certainly entering into different energy fields, but we have really no idea, what this, and yet we experience it, we know it, and there's
Yeah.
about us that does change in those fields of unitive experience. And
Yeah.
so to say that, that we're it is not to just reduce that to just, your eyes, ears, nose, mouth, and, whatever's going on in your brain. That there's the human, this is what Teilhard reminds us, we are the universe on the level of self-consciousness. Like we are this incredible, complex constellation of stars and rocks and minerals and dirt and elements and hydrogen and all the, periodic table wrapped into skin and bones and a thinking self, and yet even that doesn't quite quench the mystery
Hmm.
that we are.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this sense too. I like to talk about us as like individual nodes within a whole web.
Right,
And what's difficult is, that dual aspect idea of dual aspect monism, or, whether it's you're talking about idealism, there's this tension, and it's very difficult. And of course, we'll never really grasp it, but there's this paradoxical tension between the reality of diverse forms of life and individuals, and that we of course we talk about that God seeks to have needs an other in order to have a belovedness and a relationship with creation. But yet there's also this level at which I kind of use the image of like we're like the hand in a glove. We're like the finger of the glove, and we think we're individual, or like a grove of aspen trees. They
yeah,
look like individual trees, but underneath the surface, it's all one
yeah,
root system,
right, yeah,
all one organism. So how do we put together that it's both, that we are part of God. We are, like, in a sense, you are that, like from Hinduism, you are that. Atman is Brahman. We are God. We in that sense of the whole, but
yeah,
yet we are also individuals that are moving through this life,
right,
experiencing suffering and joy and all of that.
yeah. No, 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 I totally get that. And, um, in my new book, The Christian Mutation, I actually used Duns Scotus's idea of hekchetas for thisness, that individuating principle. And I think Merleau-Ponty does something similar. In other words, the individuating principle is each person um, is this unclonable, irrepeatable uniqueness of divine love. God is, all of God is expressed in this particular way, in this particular person with this particular personality and funny way of laughing and moving around. And this person is not that person. That person is distinct in their particularity. And what we hold in common is our
Thanks for
particularities.
listening to the first
Our
half of this
commonness
episode.
is actually
If you'd like
our
to go deeper,
individuated
click on the link in the
beingness.
show notes
And
to access the
precisely
full
because
episode
we're
for
distinct,
paid subscribers
that
of The
we
Sacred
can each
Everywhere
of
on
us is
Substack.
part of a
And if you
common whole,
enjoyed this
the whole of God
conversation,
that is in
please
you,
like,
in the
subscribe,
whole of
and
God that is
share
in
this
me,
episode far and
is
wide.
in on one
I'd
hand
love
the
your help
same
to grow
whole,
this
and yet
channel.
it's distinguished or
Until next time,
individuated in our
may you
own unique
notice the
lives.
sacred,
You know,
well, everywhere.
something like a stained glass window. Each of us is a fractal of that divine love, and yet
Mm-hmm.
it's incomplete without any one of those panes of glass.
Right, right. Wow, that's really great. Um, Before we come bring the part one of this conversation to a close, I'd like you, if you can, because you've been writing a lot lately about AI, and of course,
Mm.
AI is a big topic of interest right now, but you're talking about it in terms of religion and how the church has so far responded to AI as being an inadequate response. And you know, like everyone these days, I'm using AI for certain purposes, and and I want to talk more about that in the second part. But just give us a little bit of an introduction before we close this part to what you're thinking about the relationship between AI and God and us, and
Yeah, well, basically my views on AI and religion really come from Teilhard, who, looked at evolution as the rise of thought or the rise of consciousness, and therefore spoke about, on the level of human consciousness, the biosphere, we have, emerged onto a new level, what he called the noosphere, or the level of mind. And so, he thought that the computer, which he discovered like in 1950 or something in the early 50s, he thought that was the greatest thing because he's like, well, there you are. That's the next level of theogenesis. In other words, if God is rising up through our awareness of love, our awareness of belonging to a whole, then that continuation of divine being, continues through a greater awareness as our minds are linked into a global brain. And so
Mm.
he thought that, the internet was like the next level, as I said, the news sphere, and therefore I've built on that basically. And
Mm-hmm.
so for Teilhard, religion and human evolution go together, right? So harmonization and religion are two aspects of the same reality. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of what I read is we have in my view, an outdated anthropology. Certainly what, God bless Pope Leo. He seems like a very nice man.
Yeah.
I'm sure he'd be fun at a baseball game or basketball game or something. But, you know, um, I mean, we still have a Thomistic anthropology of body, mind, and soul. And
Mm-hmm.
these are essential. Like there's an essential beingness to the human person. And that's not true. There's nothing essential about us. I mean, if you look at the whole story of evolution, the whole thing is about, well, nature keeps moving on, and life changes. And we move from little four-legged things to, I mean, if you over the long spans of time, from mammal life to, to the beginning of human life, and then we have like a whole host of cousins, that come before us,
Mm.
Australopithecines and Nefalda and Denisovians, or however you call those things,
Yeah.
Neanderthals, and
Right.
us, so we're kind of late in the game, which means
Right.
it's always been about increasing brain size. And a lot of the changes in evolution, human evolution, come about through, well, tool making, technology.
Right.
Technology and climate change are the two major factors of human evolution. And so, guess what we're in? Climate change and technology. So we keep talking about ourselves like we've always been this way. And I'm like, no, we haven't always been this way. And we have
Yeah.
over time. And now we are in a more rapid, accelerated pace of change with technology. And it has kind of taken us by surprise. It's like, oh my gosh, we're going to go extinct. The tools are going to take over, and it's like, no, they're not. It just doesn't work that way. And so we don't know much about how information works. We don't know much how cybernetics. We don't know much about the way life complexifies, over time through tool making or technology. But these are the factors to say that, yep, we're in evolution. We won't stay Homo sapiens sapiens, for indefinitely. And what will this mean for religion? Oh, well, it'll mean religion's going to change too,
Mm-hmm.
what we started this podcast with, right? We're in a new
Yeah.
shift. And therefore, I don't think technology is really the problem, although we're making it a problem. But the bigger problem is us, because we don't even know why we created technology and what we want with it. So
Mm-hmm.
but we're all out there buying it. Like you said, we're all on Zoom. We all have our smartphones. We can't live without it. So even to have conversations of like, well, how should we, slow it down? Well, it's too late. It's already here, and it's already planning our lives for 2050. So now we have to rethink about us. And I think we're asking sometimes the wrong questions in technology.
Mm-hmm.
Or like, oh no, we have to make sure it doesn't take over our lives, or that it can't compromise our capacity to be kind or compassionate to one another. That's not the issue, actually. In fact, it has to be something different if we're going to survive, because I think those levels of question, first of all, technologists are like, oh, we don't care about those questions. So we're just going to keep making bigger and, faster chips, and
Right.
they'll just start implanting them in you, actually. You won't even need your computer anymore. They'll be in your glasses, as they are now from Meta. You'll have them, implantable software in your skin. Elon Musk wants to put a neural chip in your brain. We'll have just, and we're just like, oh my gosh, that's the end. But
Yeah.
we do have choices to make, and I think that is what's important. It's like, how do we decide? How do we know which technology is going to be helpful to us or not? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where we don't have good ethical guidelines on like
No.
how best to select the technologies that can enhance life. First of all, you kind of have to know, well, what do you live for? Like, what are you hoping to do?
Mm-hmm.
50 to 100 to maybe 1,000 years. What do you hope for your life? What do you hope for, the world? And so that's number one. We need something like a near-term eschatology to deal with a technological world.
Yeah.
We don't have any collective vision whatsoever. Although technology
None.
binds us collectively, right? We can be online in Africa and the Caribbean and you name it, you know.
Hmm.
So yeah, so informationally we're linked. Otherwise, we're disconnected. And we're disconnected because we are disconnected. And here's where my other argument is it's old religion that has disconnected us. It keeps us
Ah,
guy in the sky, and
right.
spirit is better than matter, and
Hmm.
let's pray to go to heaven because this earth is fallen, and a valley of tears. Well, as long as we keep preaching this stuff, we're going to have a problem with technology.
Mm.
My undergrads have no, so I teach this course on technology called Religion
Hmm.
and Becoming, and they watch movies. So our first movie was Blade Runner.
Uh-huh.
Understand to really appreciate the very thin line between human and humanoids, or human robots.
Hmm.
Watch the movie Her. I don't know if you've ever seen Spike Jonze's movie Her.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Their papers are really fascinating. So I just want to tell you this, that thinking about technology is a generational issue. Older
Hmm.
people are often feared by it. Younger people are like, no, this is cool. This
Yeah.
a lot of potential for us.
Right. Right. Well, let's pause there, and I want to end part one, and then we'll pick up again in just a minute for part two of this conversation. Thanks for listening to the first half of this episode. If you'd like to go deeper, click on the link in the show notes to access the full episode for paid subscribers of The Sacred Everywhere on Substack. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this episode far and wide. I'd love your help to grow this channel. Until next time, may you notice the sacred everywhere.